Title: The Woman at Table 19. My sister seated me at table 19, behind the bar, beside the restroom hallway, where the music was loud enough to bury a person twice. It was her wedding reception at Lumet Estate. All glass walls, chandeliers, champagne towers, and people pretending not to notice that I had been hidden like an unwanted coat. Then she took the microphone. "Everyone, my sister Mara made it," she said, smiling like the knife had flowers wrapped around the handle. "She's still doing her little GPS job underground somewhere. Don't ask her about it unless you need help finding the bathrooms." The room laughed. My mother laughed too. I sat there in my dress uniform jacket, hands folded, saying nothing. 20 years in compartmentalized space operations had taught me how to remain still while satellites burned above the Earth and nations blamed each other for things no civilian would ever see. But then General Marcus Vale walked through the ballroom doors. 4 stars on his shoulders. Half the military guests stood before they understood why. He crossed the entire reception, stopped in front of table 19, and saluted me. "Colonel Rowan," he said, loud enough for every guest to hear. "The Orbital Threat Response Division owes you more than this country is allowed to say." My sister dropped the microphone. And for the first time in 20 years, my family realized the boring woman they had buried in the corner had been holding the sky together. My name is Mara Rowan. For most of my adult life, I worked 5 levels beneath Cheyenne Mountain in rooms with no windows and clocks that meant less than orbital trajectories. The public map called the place a command complex. The internal map called my unit something different. Orbital Threat Response. A black cell buried inside Space Operations Command, compartmentalized so tightly that even people who worked beside us often did not know where our responsibilities began or ended. We tracked objects that governments denied launching. We modeled debris fields that could turn billion-dollar satellites into shrapnel storms. We stabilized relay systems during solar disruptions, adversarial jamming, and diplomatic crises that looked peaceful, only because no one above ground knew how close the sky had come to breaking. My work was invisible by design. That was the point. When things went well, nothing happened. No headline, no speech, no grateful nation. A satellite missed a collision path by a fraction of a degree. A missile warning relay stayed alive through an interference bloom. A rogue fragment burned out over the Pacific instead of crossing through another nation's surveillance path and starting accusations no one could publicly resolve. Success looked like silence. I learned to live inside that silence. My family used it against me. To my mother, I was the daughter who chose the wrong life. To my sister, Savannah, I was the strange, serious woman who disappeared into mountains and came home with no stories worth stealing. At 21, the night before I left for my first classified assignment, my mother stood in our kitchen and looked at my uniform hanging by the door. "If you wear that thing tomorrow," she said, "don't bother coming back for dinner." She meant it as discipline. I took it as coordinates. A line had been drawn. I crossed it. And after that, every return home came with a cost. Savannah learned early that my absence could be converted into attention for her. She filled the rooms I left behind with weddings, announcements, brand partnerships, charity lunches, and carefully staged photographs of a family that looked warmer when I was not standing in the frame. I did not fight it. At first, I told myself the mission mattered more than being understood. Later, I told myself adults should not still want their mothers to be proud. Both statements were true. Neither one healed anything. When people imagine space operations, they think of clean screens, quiet rooms, and officers pointing at glowing maps as if the universe is polite. It is not. Space is violence without sound. Objects move at speeds the human body cannot respect until numbers become consequences. A bolt the size of a thumb can cripple a satellite worth more than a hospital system. A dead panel, tumbling in the wrong orbit, can threaten a chain of assets that support disaster response: battlefield communications, navigation, banking, weather prediction, and the fragile theater of international trust. My job was to anticipate the invisible collision before it became visible disaster. I learned to read orbital behavior the way other officers read troop movement. Inclination, drift, rotation, thermal distortion, signal decay. The small lie in the data that says someone wants you to believe an object is dead when it is actually listening. I built models. Then I rebuilt them when the sky proved me wrong. I commanded teams who had not slept in 32 hours and still had to be precise because fatigue does not excuse physics. Twice, my division prevented debris events that would have forced emergency diplomatic calls between nuclear powers. Once, during Operation Granitefall, we stabilized a relay chain during a hostile interference window, while a humanitarian convoy depended on timing data below. Officially, I was involved in communication support. Unofficially, General Marcus Vale later told me, "If you had been a man, Mara, your face would already be on a coin." I laughed when he said it. Not because it was funny, because laughter was easier than admitting how tired I was of being erased by people who benefited from my silence. 4 years before Savannah's wedding, my name had been on the promotion list for Brigadier General. Then the anonymous letter arrived. Colonel Rowan has a habit of claiming credit in places where her actual participation is limited. I personally witnessed her exaggerate her role in Operation Granitefall. She was little more than a low-level liaison officer. The letter was unsigned, but it used one word that turned my stomach cold. Irregardless. Savannah loved that word. She used it at brunches, in emails, in arguments, always with the confidence of someone who thought incorrect language sounded educated if spoken loudly enough. The review board could not ignore the allegation. Not in a career field where records were classified and corroboration required access most investigators did not have. My promotion was delayed, then suspended, then buried under integrity review pending. 2 years of quiet suspicion. 2 years of colleagues lowering their voices when I entered strategy rooms. 2 years of being asked to prove classified work without exposing classified work. I knew it was Savannah. I could not prove it. That is one of the cruelest forms of betrayal. When the truth is obvious but not admissible. I did not confront her then. I should have. Instead, I stayed useful. I sent birthday gifts to nieces who barely knew me. I attended family holidays when operations allowed, knowing I would be introduced as Mara, the military one, while Savannah's husband, Eric Vale, would be introduced by his father's rank before his own name. Eric was General Vale's son. That was how I met him. Not as a love story. Not at first. Eric worked in defense consulting with enough intelligence to be decent and enough insecurity to be dangerous. He liked my competence until it required him to defend me. He admired strength as long as strength did not ask him to choose a side. When the anonymous letter stalled my promotion, he said, "Maybe it's just procedure. You know how boards are." I asked him, "Do you think I exaggerated Granite Fall?" He looked away for half a second. That half second lasted longer than any argument. "I think," he said carefully, "Savannah would not do something like that without a reason." There it was. The easier version of doubt. Not because he hated me. Because believing Savannah had betrayed me meant accepting that a beautiful, charming woman in his social circle had manufactured a professional wound. Believing I might have exaggerated required less courage. So he chose that. Our relationship did not end with a dramatic scene. It ended with a silence neither of us repaired. He married someone else 2 years later. I went deeper into the mountain. The promotion did not come. The work did. Work always does. If grief is a fire, duty is a shovel. You keep moving earth until the flames cannot reach the next structure. Savannah sent the wedding invitation in late spring. Cream paper. Gold lettering. Lume Estate. Formal attire. A handwritten note at the bottom. Try not to wear anything too military. It makes Mom uncomfortable. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I hung my dress uniform in the hotel closet and pressed every ribbon straight. The wedding weekend began with a rehearsal dinner I was not invited to until the morning of when my mother called and said, "If you come, don't make people ask questions." "What questions?" She sighed. "About your work. About why you never visit. About why you're so private." Private. That was her favorite word for the consequences of her own rejection. "I won't discuss classified operations at a rehearsal dinner," I said. "That isn't what I meant." "I know." The silence on the phone carried 20 years. "Finally," she said, "Savannah has worked very hard for this weekend. And I have worked very hard for this country." She did not answer. That told me which labor she could see. At the rehearsal dinner, Savannah seated me at the edge of a patio near a heat lamp that did not work. She kissed the air beside my cheek and said, "You look tired." "I am still doing those night shifts in the bunker." "Sometimes." She smiled. "You always make it sound so dramatic." I looked at her. I said one word. Her smile thinned. Across the room, Eric saw me and looked away. That half second again. People think betrayal is always a sword. Sometimes it is a gaze that refuses to meet yours. Later that night, I went back to my hotel and stood under the shower until the steam blurred the mirror. I had faced orbital threat cascades with less anxiety than family events. That sounds absurd, unless you have been raised inside a system where your pain is treated as inconvenience and your dignity is treated as ego. In the mountain, if a model was wrong, no one asked whether the debris field was being too sensitive. At home, facts could be dismissed if they made Savannah uncomfortable. I slept badly. At 300, my secure phone buzzed. A status report from my deputy. A small, non-cooperative object had shifted above the South Pacific. Nothing critical. My team had it. I read the update twice. Not because they needed me, but because the sky made more sense than my family. By morning, the object had burned out harmlessly. By evening, I was sitting at table 19. Lume Estate sat on a hill above the Potomac. All limestone terraces, glass walls, imported roses, and the kind of lighting that makes wealth look like morality. Savannah had always understood presentation. She understood where to stand in photographs, how to cry without ruining makeup, how to make exclusion look accidental. My place card was not with family. It was not even near the front. Table 19 sat behind the bar, half blocked by a pillar, near the hallway to the restrooms. The servers looked apologetic when they guided me there. I almost laughed. In military terms, it was a deliberate placement. Low visibility. High noise. Minimal access to command center. My mother saw me from across the ballroom and looked away. Savannah saw me too. She smiled. Not warmly. Strategically. I sat down. At the table with me were a distant cousin, a florist's assistant, 2 people from Savannah's yoga studio, and an uncle who immediately asked whether the Air Force still needed space girls now that billionaires had rockets. Space Force, I said. He waved a hand. Same sky. Same sky. If only he knew. The ceremony was beautiful because Savannah could make anything beautiful if there were cameras nearby. The vows were short. The reception began with champagne and speeches. I watched from the corner as my sister moved beneath chandeliers like she had been born under favorable lighting. My mother cried during the father-daughter dance, even though our father had been dead for 12 years, and the man dancing with Savannah was her godfather. No one mentioned the empty places. Families are skilled editors. They cut what ruins the story. Dinner came. Toasts began. Then Savannah took the microphone. She thanked guests, vendors, cousins, sponsors, God, lighting designers, and people who had flown in from 3 countries. Then her eyes found mine. And my sister Mara is here, she said. A few heads turned toward table 19. My fork stopped above the plate. She's still doing her little GPS work underground somewhere? Savannah continued. So if anyone gets lost tonight, please ask her. She can probably satellite track the bathrooms. Laughter moved through the room. My mother laughed first. That hurt more than it should have. It always does when the old wound proves it still knows your name. Savannah smiled wider. In all seriousness, Mara has always been very committed to being mysterious. We never really know what she does, but we're sure it's very organized. More laughter. Someone at the bar said, "Spreadsheet warrior?" I set down my fork. Slowly, the part of me that commanded orbital threat teams became still. In the mountain, stillness meant the model was about to change. Savannah opened her mouth again. Then the ballroom doors opened. General Marcus Vale did not need an announcement. 4 stars are their own weather. He entered in dress uniform with 2 aides behind him and a small group of senior officers from multiple branches. The room changed in waves. First the military guests, then the civilians who recognized the military guests standing, then the photographers who understood that something more interesting than the wedding had arrived. Savannah lowered the microphone. Eric, standing near the head table, went pale. He knew his father was invited. He did not know why. General Vale crossed the room without greeting the bride. Not because he was rude. Because he had already identified the real ceremony. He walked past the champagne tower, past my mother, past Savannah frozen on the stage, past tables full of people suddenly rearranging their faces. He stopped in front of table 19. I stood. Not because he outranked me, though he did. Because respect should be met standing. He raised his hand. A full salute. Sharp. Formal. Unmistakable. The room went silent. "Colonel Rowan," he said, "on behalf of those of us cleared to know what you have carried, thank you." I returned the salute. "General?" He lowered his hand. Then he turned slightly, letting the room hear every word. There are people in this country who sleep safely because officers like Colonel Mara Rowan are willing to serve in places that cannot be named, doing work that cannot be explained, enduring suspicion from people who benefit from their silence. Savannah's microphone slipped from her hand. It hit the floor with a crack that echoed through the ballroom. No one laughed. General Vale continued. Operation Granite Fall would have failed without her command decisions. So would 2 other events no one in this room has clearance to discuss. My mother stood slowly. Her face had lost all performance. Eric did not move. He looked haunted. Not surprised. Haunted? That told me something. He had known enough to doubt his doubt. He had simply lacked the courage to act. General Vale faced me again. The record has been corrected. For a second, I did not understand. Then his aide stepped forward and handed me a sealed folder. Inside was a promotion review reinstatement notice, a formal exoneration, and a handwritten note from General Elijah Weston, the senior officer who had overseen the corrected inquiry. The note was brief. What they can no longer do, what none of us can do anymore, is erase you. True leadership is forged in shadow. You are not an exception. Colonel, you are the beginning of a correction. I read it once. Then again, the ballroom blurred. Not from tears. From the sudden removal of weight. For 2 years, I had carried the accusation like a classified wound. Now, in the middle of my sister's beautiful wedding, the wound had been entered into the public record. Savannah stepped down from the stage. "Mara," she whispered. I looked at her. She looked smaller without the microphone. General Vale did not move away. Neither did the officers behind him. For once, my sister could not control the room by sounding confident. The truth outranked her. The reception never recovered. Music resumed because vendors are trained to survive emotional disasters, but no one danced for a long time. People approached me carefully. A Navy captain shook my hand. An Air Force lieutenant colonel said, "Ma'am, my team studied your relay stabilization model." A Marine general simply nodded once, the kind of nod that contained a whole paragraph of respect. My mother remained near the head table, one hand pressed against her throat. Savannah disappeared into a side room. Eric found me on the terrace 20 minutes later. The Potomac was dark below the hill. Behind the glass, the reception moved like a silent film. He stood beside me, but did not lean on the railing. "I should have believed you," he said. I looked at the river. "Yes." The honesty of my answer made him flinch. "I chose the easier version," he said. I turned toward him. "What does that mean?" It was easier to think the board had reasons. Easier to think Savannah was dramatic, but not cruel. Easier to think you were strong enough that my silence would not matter. The night air smelled of roses and rain. People love calling women strong when they want permission not to defend them. He closed his eyes. "I know." "Do you?" "I am haunted by it." "That is not the same as repair." "No," he said, "it is not." For the first time, Eric did not try to sound noble. That made him harder to hate. "I chose wrong," he said, not by accident, by fear. I looked back into the ballroom, where my mother was still refusing to come outside. "Then live differently." He nodded. "No promises." That was better. Promises are easy at weddings. Change is harder after breakfast. My mother came outside after Eric left. She stood in the doorway, one hand still at her throat, as if the truth had caught there. "I did not know," she said. I looked at her. "You did not ask?" Her eyes filled, but I felt no urge to comfort her. That frightened me more than her tears. For years, her pain had controlled the temperature of every room. If she was uncomfortable, I adjusted. If she was disappointed, I shrank. If she was proud of Savannah, I pretended the warmth spilling toward my sister did not leave me cold. That night, under the terrace lights, I let my mother be uncomfortable. "You could have told us," she said. "I tried at 21. You told me not to come home." She looked away. "That was a long time ago." "Yes," I said. "It was—" The conversation ended there. Not every confrontation becomes a speech. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to rescue someone from the consequences of remembering. Savannah found me at Reagan National the next morning. I was waiting near a quiet gate, uniform jacket folded over my arm, coffee gone cold beside me. She wore sunglasses indoors. A coward's veil. For a minute, she stood in front of me without speaking. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. Old, folded many times. I knew before she handed it to me. The anonymous letter, my promotion delay. 2 years of suspicion. 2 years of rooms cooling when I entered. I took it. Her hand shook. "Why?" I asked. Savannah's face changed in the way faces do when they are too tired to perform beauty. "Because Mom looked at you once," she said. I said nothing. At Dad's funeral, she continued, "You handled everything. Bills, calls, the military honors, the thank you notes. Everyone kept saying how capable you were." Her voice cracked. I hated it. I stared at the letter. "So you decided to damage my career?" I told myself you would survive it. There it was again. The convenient myth of my strength. "I did survive it," I said. "That does not make it less violent." She nodded, tears slipping under the sunglasses. I used irregardless, didn't I? The absurdity almost made me laugh. "Yes. I always thought it sounded smart." "It sounded like you—" She removed the sunglasses then. Her eyes were red. "I wanted to erase you," she said, "because if you were real, then everything Mom built around me was fake." The gate announcement crackled overhead. Passengers shifted around us, unaware that a war was ending in 2 chairs near a charging station. "Are you asking for forgiveness?" I asked. She swallowed. "No, I don't think I get to ask for that." Good. That was the first intelligent thing she had said in years. "What are you asking for?" "I don't know." I folded the letter and placed it in my bag. "Then start there." She looked confused. "Start with not knowing. It is more honest than what you usually do." I boarded my flight 5 minutes later. I did not hug her. Some departures are also boundaries. For the next month, Savannah sent nothing. No texts. No apology flowers. No carefully worded social media post about healing. That silence helped me trust that maybe, for the first time, she was not performing repentance. Then, the corrected statement arrived from the review office. Savannah had submitted a sworn admission of authorship. She had waived privacy protection. She had named envy, family pressure, and the false accusation directly. It did not undo the damage, but it stopped the lie from breathing. That mattered. 3 months later, I stood on a stage at the Defense Leadership Summit in Colorado Springs and introduced the SIERRA initiative. The name embarrassed me at first. Then General Vale said, "Good, let it embarrass the people who made it necessary." SIERRA stood for Support, Integrity, Empowerment, Resilience, Redemption, and Advocacy. It was not a memorial to my pain. I refused that. It was a system. Support for service members isolated by family rejection. Integrity protection for personnel records vulnerable to anonymous allegations. Empowerment for officers in compartmentalized units whose work could not be defended publicly. Resilience training that did not romanticize suffering. Redemption pathways for institutions and individuals who needed to correct harm without controlling the victim's healing. Advocacy to ensure silent service did not become invisible service. In my speech, I did not mention Savannah by name. I did not mention my mother. I spoke about the empty chair. At my colonel promotion ceremony, I said, I left one chair open on my left. People assumed it was for a missing parent. It was not. It was for the 21-year-old version of me who almost chose belonging over duty because the people she loved made her feel that one required losing the other. The room was still. That chair is for every service member who has ever asked. If my own family cannot see me, how do I know I exist? I looked across rows of uniforms and civilian leaders. Feeling uncomfortable does not mean you are wrong. Being unseen does not mean you are unworthy. And silence, when required by duty, must never become permission for others to erase you. When I finished, no one moved for a second. Then the room stood. Not like the wedding. Not shocked. Deliberate. I accepted it. That mattered. There had been years when I would have deflected applause like incoming fire. Years when recognition felt dangerous because it might be taken away or used as evidence that I had asked for too much. This time, I stood still and let the room see me. The initiative spread faster than I expected. Not because of me, because the need had been waiting. A Navy officer in a submarine intelligence unit wrote that his family thought he was just IT until his command used the initiative to help him explain classified boundaries without exposing work. An Air Force captain reported an anonymous allegation from a jealous relative before it stalled her board. A Marine major used the support network after his parents cut contact because his duty station did not match their politics. A Space Force analyst sent a message with only one sentence. The empty chair saved me. I printed that one and kept it in my desk. A young major found me after the speech. She waited until the crowd thinned, then stood near the exit with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. My family thinks I'm selfish for staying in, she said. I did not ask her branch. I did not ask for details. Pain has enough paperwork without strangers demanding forms. Are you selfish? I asked. No, ma'am. Then do not let their discomfort write your evaluation. Her eyes filled. They say I changed. You probably did. That surprised her. I continued. The problem is not that service changes us. The problem is when people only love the version of us they could control. She inhaled sharply, the way people do when a sentence opens a locked room. Does it stop hurting? No, I said, but it stops giving orders. She nodded once, wiped her eyes, and left. That was when I knew the initiative would outgrow me. Not because it had funding. Because it had language. And sometimes language is the first shelter a person receives. My mother never apologized in the way people want mothers to apologize. She sent a card after the summit. The front had a watercolor of mountains. Inside, she wrote, "I did not know how to be proud of what I could not understand." It was not enough. But it was true. Sometimes truth arrives too late to be a home, but early enough to become a bridge you may or may not cross. Eric became one of SIERRA's first civilian advocates. He did not ask me to praise him for it. He did not ask to be publicly forgiven. He simply did the work. That was the closest thing to repair I trusted. At a policy roundtable 6 months later, he stood in front of a room full of senior leaders and said, "I once mistook a woman's endurance for evidence that she needed no defense. That was cowardice, wearing professional caution." He did not look at me when he said it. I appreciated that. Repentance should not always turn the harmed person into an audience. The promotion process reopened the following year. Not quickly. Military systems do not sprint just because they have been corrected. They document, review, reconfirm, recheck. Delay in the name of fairness what speed might have repaired in the name of justice. But this time, my file moved without the shadow Savannah had written into it. At the ceremony, I left the chair open again. This time, I did not feel sad when I looked at it. I felt accompanied. The younger version of me had not vanished. She had simply been waiting for the older version to stop abandoning her. General Vale attended. So did Eric. My mother did not. She sent flowers and a note that said, "I am trying." I placed the flowers in a side room. Trying was better than denial. It was not the same as presence. Savannah came but stood in the back. Afterward, she approached with both hands visible, as if coming near a dangerous animal. "I won't ask for a picture," she said. "Good." I just wanted to say the chair was right. I waited. You should have saved a seat for yourself years ago. It was not perfect, but it was honest. Maybe, I said, maybe I was waiting until I knew I deserved to sit there. She looked down. "You always did." I nodded once. "I know that now." That was the difference. Once, I would have needed her to convince me. Now, her recognition was only confirmation of something I had already claimed. There was one more thing people never understood about the mountain. It did not feel like hiding. It felt like holding. Every console, every blinking alert, every orbital model on those screens represented someone above ground who would never know our names and still depended on us. A farmer using weather data before a storm. A medic following coordinates after a flood. A young soldier calling home through a relay chain we kept alive, while interference crawled across the spectrum like poison. That was why Savannah's jokes had always cut so strangely. They were not only insults. They were misunderstandings with teeth. She called it GPS because GPS was the only word she knew. My mother called it underground work, like I had chosen a basement instead of a mission. Eric called the review procedure because procedure sounded cleaner than betrayal. But on the nights when 3 nations were one misunderstanding away from accusing each other of sabotage, no one in that mountain cared whether my family understood my job. They cared whether I was right. I missed that clarity when I was away from it. Family rooms had no clean telemetry. At home, a lie could orbit for decades and still be treated as tradition. A mother's preference could masquerade as peace. A sister's envy could be called personality. A man's silence could be renamed neutrality. In the mountain, if an object drifted, we named the drift. If a signal was corrupted, we called it corrupted. If a model failed, we fixed the model. I began to wonder what families would become if they were forced to use accurate language. Not Savannah is sensitive. Savannah is cruel when she feels unseen. Not Mom wants everyone together. Mom wants a version of togetherness where no one confronts her choices. Not Eric does not want drama. Eric fears the cost of defending the truth. Not Mara is distant. Mara learned distance from people who made closeness unsafe. By the time I stood on that summit stage and spoke about SIERRA, those sentences had stopped feeling like rebellion. They felt like data. And data, once named correctly, can finally be used to prevent the next failure. Years later, I retired to the Amalfi Coast. People always assume retirement from classified work must feel like falling out of orbit. For me, it felt like surf. Messy. Loud. Alive. I bought a white house carved into a cliff above the Mediterranean. The kind of place so beautiful, it looked irresponsible. The first week, I woke at 400 every morning because my body still believed the world needed monitoring. Then a boy from the village named Matteo saw me painting on the terrace. He was 8, maybe 9, with a serious face and a habit of asking questions without warning. "Are you a soldier?" he asked in Italian. Once, "Why do you paint black skies in daylight?" I looked at the canvas. I had painted satellites as small silver marks inside dark blue. Because some parts of the sky are easier to see when you stop expecting daylight. He considered that. Then he pointed at me and said, "Donna Phantasma? Ghost woman." I should have disliked it. I did not. I painted a whole series under that name. Donna Phantasma. Women made of shadow and signal. Empty chairs beside bright rooms. Arches held by unseen stones. Satellites burning safely into ocean dark. A young officer in uniform standing outside a kitchen door, deciding not to beg for permission. People bought them. Critics wrote things about feminine absence, militarized silence, and spatial memory. Matteo said, "I like the one with the chair." His review mattered most. The Department of Defense later asked me to chair the Integrity Council created from SIERRA. I declined. Not because I stopped caring. Because my mission had ended. Systems must learn to stand without the person whose pain designed them. I had given them the blueprint. I was allowed to keep the rest of my life. On the 5th anniversary of the wedding, a letter arrived from General Elijah Weston. Handwritten, old-fashioned. He wrote, "What they cannot do anymore, what none of us can do anymore, is erase that you existed. You reminded us that leadership is forged in shadow before it is ever recognized in light. You are not the exception. Mara, you were the correction beginning." I read the letter on the terrace with sea wind moving through the curtains. Then I placed it in a drawer beside the anonymous letter. Not because the two were equal, because one showed what tried to erase me, and the other showed what finally refused to. That evening, I set up a blank canvas. For a long time, I did not paint. I watched the water turn gold. For most of my life, integrity had meant doing the right thing without needing applause. I still believe that, but I have learned something else. Integrity does not need applause to exist. But when it is deliberately buried, bringing it into the light is not vanity. It is correction. My family once believed invisibility meant insignificance. My career taught me the opposite. The most important systems often depend on what no one sees. The satellite relay that does not fail. The warning that never becomes a headline. The officer at table 19. The empty chair. The keystone. The ghost woman. I am all of them. And none of them require permission anymore. Savannah tried to erase me. My mother tried not to see me. Eric doubted me because doubt was easier than courage. The system paused me because anonymous lies are simpler to process than classified truth. But in the end, I did not survive by becoming louder. I survived by becoming undeniable. There is a difference. Loudness demands attention. Truth waits. Then, at the exact moment the room can no longer pretend, it stands up, salutes, and says your name correctly. Mara Rowan. Colonel Sierra, to the ones who needed the initiative. Donna Phantasma, to the child who saw the ghost and did not fear her. And to the 21-year-old woman standing in that kitchen with her uniform by the door, wondering whether she was about to lose her family by choosing herself. I would say this. Go anyway. Wear the uniform. Let the chair stay empty until you are ready to sit beside yourself. The people who cannot bear your light will call it discomfort. Let them. Feeling uncomfortable does not mean you are wrong. Being invisible does not mean you are unworthy. And when the world finally sees what you carried in silence, do not shrink to make the revelation easier for those who benefited from your disappearance. Stand there. Let the microphone fall. Let the room go quiet. Let the truth outrank them.